Hello, my name is Professor Yvonne Rogers, and I'm going to be chairing this lunch hour lecture at UCL. It is my great pleasure to introduce Duncan Brumby, a colleague of mine at UCLIC, which stands for UCL Interaction Centre. He's a professor in human-computer interaction and is best known for his impactful research into understanding how digital tools influence human behavior, productivity, and well-being. In particular, his work addresses challenges such as multitasking and managing our smartphone distractions. And in the last year or so, he's begun exploring the transformative potential of generative AI in education. I think what stands out about Duncan is his ability to make complex ideas accessible. When I first joined UCL, I taught a course with him and I learnt a lot through the way in which he presented these ideas. He also knows how to make a mean, captivating PowerPoint slide. So, without further ado, please join me in welcoming Professor Duncan Brumby, who will be giving this lecture on the hot topic of the AI revolution is here, why we all need AI literacy in higher education. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Ron, for a wonderful introduction. So yeah, I want to start off today's talk with going back to the end of last year when we celebrated the Nobel Prize being given to two members of our community for their fundamental contributions to this AI revolution, if you like, that is capturing a lot of attention and arguably changing the world in some small ways. What if you think of AI, I'd say the first thing that probably comes to most people's mind is ChatGPT, which is a form of large language model and generative AI. And this launched in November 2022. And what makes this kind of technology interesting, if you like, is that it produces novel content. So you can have a conversation with it and it will produce novel collections of words in reply to your prompts. And the timing of this, I think, is also quite important because it just came on the back of the lifting of the COVID-19 restrictions, which saw, particularly for universities, a pulling away from, because of restrictions, in-person, unseen exams in big halls, and instead a big shift to coursework. So I think the timing is important here. It caused quite a lot of attention. And I think we're starting to see that still in the media. So this is a story that was reported just last week in The Guardian, and it's on the back of a major report that found that many students now say that they use these generative AI tools like ChatGPT to support their work. So when working on courseworks. And I think this has triggered quite a lot of concern and panic in educational institutions like UCL. And the question is, what do we do about it? And I think there are some calls here to kind of stop the clock, if you like, and to ban this technology and to see it as something which is fundamentally dangerous. But I think we have to just look back to previous revolutions, in particular the Industrial Revolution, where new tools and technologies were invented, and to learn that kind of this there is always going to be alarm when new technologies are invented, but we need to kind of take a more measured and reflective consideration, because one thing's for sure is that we can't uninvent this technology. It is now, as they say, the genie is out of the box. And so I think we have a responsibility for taking this seriously. I've been talking to a lot of colleagues, so both thinking about this in my own teaching at UCL on the program that I teach on, and as a result of that, I obviously run assessments for my modules, but I also sit within a faculty position where we talk about assessment policy, and I think it's already here in the UCL academic manual, the core tension, I think. So I've taken a little snippet from our academic manual. And it basically says that assessments, they must be designed to meet our dual responsibilities. and that is to provide degree credentials that have unquestioned academic integrity, but also preparing students for success in their futures. And I think it's this tension of credentialing and preparation for the future. This is the thing that's causing the tension I feel that these large language models in particular are making us reflect on and think hard about. One thing is for sure that if we think about the future of work, um, there is emerging evidence. I mean, this is still only new technology, but here's an Economist article just from a few weeks ago surveying a series of recent publications, and it makes the case that in complex tasks, so tasks where people are leading, such as research, management, there's new evidence emerging that high performers are best positioned to work with AI. So this idea that those top tier jobs, it's not just being a smart individual, but you're going to be using these AI tools to get ahead. These are fundamentally tools to help us think and get on in the world. And but there is a critical catch here that evaluating the outputs of these models requires expertise and good judgment. And that's something that I'm going to keep coming back to over and over again in today's talk. Three's the magic number. So I'm going to structure this talk around three things. The fears of AI-enabled cheating, and I want to take this concern seriously and unpick it a little bit. And then I'm going to talk about the importance of developing AI literacy skills, which is in the title of the talk. And then I'm going to focus on what I would consider the most important thing, which is how we preserve our unique human voice in the face of all this automation. So if we take the long view on this, people have been using tools for a long time, from the early stone-held devices through to our smartphones. We use tools to help us do things we can't do normally, or to do things better. And I'm going to put a controversial statement out that I think these large language models, they are just simply better writing tools. So, many of you may have had the experience of starting out in school as a young infant, sitting at a table with a pencil in hand and writing by hand. And you've got to focus on things like learning to spell and to get the fine motor control necessary to do, say, joined up handwriting. I still have memories of that time at school. Didn't enjoy it at all. I'm left-handed and have terrible spelling. So I was delighted when I got to university, and was able to be freed from these constraints. Instead, now I can use a keyboard, and mechanically tap in characters. So there's none of that fine motor control necessary. And critically, there's additional affordances here. So the spelling, which I find difficult, is supported by spell checkers. But it goes beyond that, of course, as well. We don't send handwritten notes to each other anymore. We rely on digital communication. So we send email or so, and it is through this that we're able to do things that we couldn't do before. The fact that I'm talking to you now is over a tool that is allowing us to do this. So we're not having to be gathered in a physical room, which has constraints on all of us being there at the same time. So I really do think that generative AI is just the next step along in terms of it being just an advanced word processor. But like all tools, how it is used matters immensely. That's the key catch, of course. And so the concern is this, right? So let's just play along, okay, with me for a moment. We can go to a tool like ChatGPT and say, can you draft me a 1,500 word essay that critically discusses the role of AI in higher education? So all I've done here is to formulate a prompt, which is pretty easy, and that could even be given by the teacher or the professor. And then I press go. And within a few seconds, the model produces unique content just for me. It provides for me a model answer, if you like. And the concern is that if I were the student who didn't want to engage with the material, I could just simply copy and paste this and put my name on it. So this sits within the long framing of things around we've had contract cheating before where some students get other people to do their work on their behalf, and it's in our academic manual that that's not appropriate and against the regs. And to some, using a tool like ChatGPT or other large language models looks like contract cheating, that the student has simply delegated the responsibility of producing original content to a machine, and therefore it's a form of plagiarism. And it's from this fear, I think, that some are calling for a return to those pre-COVID era in-person unseen exams where we all sit in halls down at the Excel Centre. Obviously, I think there is a place for this. I think there are some things that you get from some things that you can be sure of in that setting. But I think when we go back to that academic manual, we also have a duty and responsibility to prepare our students for the future and also to offer them a variety of assessments. And I think what we're doing with courseworks is looking, it looks more like the world of work, particularly knowledge work. And most people, I certainly don't sit in an exam hall when I go to work, so it seems a bit of an odd way to assess our students. So I think we do need to think about how to balance this. But first, before getting into that, I've got some thoughts on this. I just want to take seriously this idea for a moment, because I think the first thing we need to do is to name our fears and to be very clear about what they are. And I think this fear of AI cheating, it's the idea that the weak student, the undeserving student, the student who is choosing not to attend lectures or engage at all with their studies, is somehow able to bypass learning and to earn a prestigious degree by simply pressing a button, by entering in the materials given to them by the professor, spitting it out, and then simply plagiarizing it and calling it their own. I just don't think this holds much water, if I'm honest. So I've been exposing my students to the strengths and weaknesses of these models. We talk weekly about what we're doing in terms of what I'm teaching, but also how they're going to be assessed. And I talk often about my own use of using large language models like ChatGPT, but also exposing them, the students, to content that's produced by these models. So one activity in particular is that my students were going to be assessed by an essay, which they had to write. And in the early weeks of term, I gave them, many students have questions about what do you expect from an essay? How should an essay be written? What are you looking for? And to help resolve these questions, I get them to both practice writing an essay themselves, but then also to mark essays that were written by students in previous years, where we have examiner feedback as well. And what we learn here is that students are very good. In fact, they correlate almost perfectly. So we give them a range of previous essays, and the grades that the students give correlates perfectly or matches what our examiners would give. So students are able to assess, they can see what a good essay looks like. Um, this year, I inserted in two synthetic essays that were written by ChatGPT. And these were based upon a lot of information from all the course materials, as well as being fed examples of previous essays. And it was asked to generate the best possible essay. The best possible essay that ChatGPT could produce was doing about 10 percentage points weaker than the average of our students. So it was just sitting at that borderline pass merit, which it's obviously still passing, so there's concerns there, but it wasn't strong, to be clear. And I'm going to dig into this just with a very quick example. So this is not the essays that my students saw. Instead, I'm going to show you the essay that was generated by ChatGPT at the beginning of this talk. That one where I said, make me an essay about the challenges of generative AI in higher education. And this is the essay that it produced. And let's just say that I'm a student who wants to cheat and I'm just going to pass this off in my own work. How would it fare? I would say not very well. Yes, it's well written in the sense of the grammar is good and it's a pleasure to read, but it's just not very good, really. So in particular, there's this line here. Research suggests that adaptive learning enhances student engagement and retention by catering to individual learning styles and paces. Chenatel 2021. Okay, so this is summarizing some previous research. I would say, as a UCL professor and somebody who teaches on our programs, that this is not adequate. There are no details about this study. So usually we'd be looking for more depth in, a summary of this study. What did Chenatel do? How did they determine this? And this is entirely missing from this essay. So it's just provided a superficial reply. And this is the catch. The reason I'm able to have this insight is because I know what to expect. I've got an understanding of what the standards are. Now, of course, you could be thinking, well, the diligent student would, of course, simply go find that paper, drop it into, say, ChatGPT, get it to summarize it, and then add a bit more, so on and so forth. But that is the problem. Well, that in a nutshell, that is the issue here. That in order to use these tools, you have to know what you're wanting to get out of them. So there's this well-known effect in psychology called the Dunning-Kruger effect. And in a nutshell, it says you don't know what you don't know. And so this issue really comes to the center when it comes to using large language models like ChatGPT. If you don't know what to ask it or how to drive it, you won't know how to evaluate the output that it gives you. And critically, you won't know what question to then ask next. So I quite like this slide. The thought experiment is this. It's as if the student or anyone you're lost in the mirror maze of your own thoughts. And you're looking for ways to kind of make sense of what's around you. And if you don't know where you're going or what the path is, simply adding a large language model like ChatGPT is just not going to help you. It's not that this is some great oracle of truth that is going to show you the way out and to provide you that easy exit. And the reason for this is fundamental to how these tools work. This technology hallucinates. It does not have these it works in the same way that we construct information. It's digested a lot of text and a lot of information, and from that it makes inferences. And it's through those inferences that it makes mistakes. And so sometimes when you get it to write an essay for you, it will fabricate references that sound plausible but are not correct. I've experienced this, working with my children, helping them with their homework. You ask it even trivial questions about very simple, secondary school content in core sciences, and it will get deeply confused and tell you incorrect information. And of course, always when you challenge it and you say, "Are you sure that's right?" It will say, "Oh yeah, you're right. You got it. I was wrong there." Um, and one this morning, an example just this morning. So I was using ChatGPT to make a section of text a little bit more concise, and I said we have to get it down to this number of characters. And it kept giving me back new text, and it kept being over because it was unable to count. So these, it's fundamental to this technology. So this reply that we sometimes hear from the technologists that new models will just make the hallucinations go away. I just don't think that holds much water because I think this is fundamental to how these inference machines work. They make those mistakes in the same way that we make mistakes, and the knowledge base that we pull on is also, varied. So I just don't think this idea of or this fear of I think we need to name this fear of AI enabled cheating, but I just don't think it holds that much water because I just don't think you can use it off the shelf that easily to say get yourself a degree for free without engaging with the content. Instead, though, I think we have a responsibility, instead of focusing on those concerns, we have a responsibility to prepare our students for the future. And in doing that, we need to focus on these developing the actual AI literacy skills that are going to be so necessary for the future. And I think they are so important for the future because we are entering a new era here. These technologies are allowing people to do profoundly disturbing things like generate fake content. And I think having those critical evaluation skills to be able to evaluate content is going to be super important. So I've been delighted to hear examples from colleagues across UCL who have been doing very innovative assessments where they give their students, for instance, like I just did earlier, a a fabricated or should I say a synthetic essay or content generated by a large language model that sounds compelling, is well written, but is saying absolute garbage compared to the material that they've been taught on their program. And then students are basically the assessment activity is then to pull out what is true and what is not true based upon their actual knowledge of the content. And I think this is a great form of assessment. And I think something that we should be really developing those critical evaluation skills on the output side. On the production side, I think there's a much deeper trap, and that is the speed trap. These tools do make things very quick and easy. And I think that we've known this. I'm in an area called human computer interaction. and that field has been concerned with usability of computing systems. And we're aware of the double-edged sword of usability. You make things easier for people, and they think a little less and just do it on autopilot. So Daniel Kahneman talked about this idea of system one and system two thinking. So I think there is a kind of a paradox here of usability we need to be very careful of. And it's not just students, to be really clear. So academics too are using these tools to help them do their work faster, to be more productive. I know certainly I am. Um, and there was this article that was published about a year ago now, yeah, this time last year, and it caused quite a storm on social media because, there was a fragment in here or evidence that the authors had used a large language model to help them with their writing. And the discussion on social media was quite horrific, actually. Something that one of my colleagues has referred to as AI shaming, where, the people felt quite enraged that this was allowed to happen. How dare these authors do this? And honestly, I just don't understand what the problem is. It's a bit, I think with enough time, in 5, 10 years' time, this will be a bit like being outraged by saying, how dare the authors use Microsoft Word to help them write their work? It's just another tool. And of course, the question is how and why did they not spot it? But I think that's a separate issue. It's not the tool per se that's the problem, it's how it's being used. We explored this question quite deeply in an essay that we wrote last year. Um, you really ought to check what the LMM said on your behalf. And this paper goes into quite a lot of deep thinking about how we encourage that checking of content. So, given that it's easy to produce words, how do you keep the person, the human author, in the loop? So that despite the machine generating all these words, how do you make sure the person checks properly? And we had a few ideas that we explored in this essay. But I think this is honestly, this is quite an old and well-known problem. So I put up here the ironies of automation. This is a famous paper from back at the beginning, 1983, by Bainbridge. And it basically, I show here a picture of a manual gear shifter on a car. And it's just held up as an example where we have a degree of automation. So you can now choose to drive an automatic car. And if you drive an automatic car, you may de-skill yourself in learning how to do manual transmission. So let's say, you have an automatic car at home, but then you go on vacation and you've not driven a manual stick shift car for many years. It will take you some time to remember how to do that basic activity. So it's kind of the old idea is that, once you've learned to ride a bike, you never forget. And here the argument is that you kind of can forget, or there's a risk that you risk de-skilling yourself. And I think that is an important point to think about. How do we maintain this idea of personal responsibility for learning and skill development in our universities so that people continue to retain the important skills of critical thinking and judgment, even though some things are now being automated or can be automated? I'm just going to take a stop here because I love music. And I think it's pretty uncontroversial to say that the Beatles had a big impact on popular music. They are able to really push the boundary in a very short span of time in moving things forward. And as a result of that, many people have asked, how did they do it? What did they do in order to achieve this? Um, One answer, of course, is that they did a lot of stuff before that magical moment. So before that transformative moment when they were able to really pull all of their skill and expertise together, they had many hours of just basic practicing in these bars in Hamburg. So Malcolm Gladwell talks about this in his popular press book, The Outliers. And it's essentially arguing that there's no substitute for sitting in your room and strumming a guitar hour after hour after hour if you want to get good, even though you could use a synthesizer or some other form of technology to kind of reproduce that for you much more effortlessly. There's no substitute for hard work. And this has basis in psychology. So psychologists have known for a long time the power law of practice. Generally speaking, people get better at things the more times they do it. So this has been demonstrated. So what we see here is a graph, and on the x-axis running along the bottom, it's the number of practice attempts. So going from 1 all the way up to 80 practice times. And on the y-axis, we have time to complete the task. And what we see here is a kind of people get faster and faster the more they practice. This has been demonstrated in the writing. So here's a paper from Psychological Science from quite a few years ago now by Stellan Olson, and the author analyzed the writing record of Isaac Asimov, so an author who wrote a lot of books over his lifetime. And so we have here a graph, a critical graph. It shows writing time in months across Asimov's career from zero, the first book being started, through to 500 months in. And on the y-axis, we have the number of books. And what you see here is, again, a power law of practice effect. Or should I say, um, writing speed increased with each book that was being written. So as time progressed, the author here was able to write faster and faster and faster. So if we take an idea here, halfway through the person's career at 250 months, they only wrote 100 books, but by the end they got to 500. So there's this massive speed up because the basic skills were being refined and made better. And this is where I come back to my opening statement that what these tools are, they are just advanced word processors. How they're used matters, but I think it's forcing us critically to take a step back and to think about, in the same way that moving from writing on a chalkboard to writing on a keyboard makes you think about what are the important skills that we need to preserve, develop, and protect, and what are the things which are just, they're almost accidents of the technology. So the ability to hold your pencil correctly is a feature just of handwriting. Once you move over to a keyboard, that doesn't matter. So I think it forces us, as the tool changes, the opportunity in how we engage changes. So what are the things we can strip away, and what are the things we need to preserve and protect and to work on? And this is where I come to the final point, preserving our human voice, because I think this is the most important thing. I think despite all of these concerns of potential plagiarism, if you like, or using computers to put words together for us, I think critically, despite us using this more advanced word processor, we must remain the author, and that is absolutely essential. I've been deeply influenced here by work by Advait Sarkar, Microsoft Research in Cambridge. I give you a point out to his paper here. It's another essay, and it takes a critical stance on what it means to be creative, if you like, even though you're kind of mechanizing parts of that process. Definitely would encourage you to take a look if you are interested. But in a nutshell, it's focusing on these higher order or higher level factors. Storytelling. What is it we want to say? The skills that we have. So that skill might be the ability to write good prompts and evaluate them, but also it's going to be some basic skills or transferable skills about what a particular style of writing should look like. You know, what's an appropriate level of depth to go into. And then critically, of course, our own knowledge, which is absolutely vital given that these tools tend to hallucinate and make all sorts of errors. We need to be constantly fact checking it. I'm going to give you, I've been exploring personally, I've been using these tools quite a lot, but I've been exploring more specifically since the start of this year with a particular AI assisted writing pipeline, which breaks this down into three basic steps. The first one is capturing thoughts. And this is, in a nutshell, outlining. So you could do this in a number of different ways. You could get pen and paper and rapidly sketch out an argument. I've been personally using my phone quite a lot because it's something we all just carry around and you can speak to it. And obviously, I've got quite a lot of practice at public speaking, so I'm able to kind of structure my thoughts in a way that I can speak them quite clearly. And so it's possible to record these thoughts and just to very rapidly outline using an iPhone with Siri, just to rapidly convert that speech into text. And then there's a separate step, and then there's a line. So that's an outline. What do we want to say? The argument is captured. The kind of raw thought is captured and put down onto paper quickly. But we know this is the thing that the spoken word is verbose, it's messy. This talk is hopefully engaging and interesting, but it's not the same as reading a paper. We misspeak, even people that have got a lot of practice at speaking. We tend to say things slightly wrong. And the written document does still have many benefits. The writing, a good friend of mine said to me that the beauty of poetry, you can say in a few lines what you could, communicate after many hours of rambling, right? There's a compact elegance to the written form. And I think we do value that. And it's certainly very important for, evaluating, say, students' work. We use the essay still because it's compact, it can be transferred easily, it can be read by others. And so there's many benefits to that. And I think this second step of getting the words right is very important. And this is where I think something like a large language model like ChatGPT can be used as a writing support tool. But that's not the end of it. So once you've finished your wordsmithing using your advanced word processor, I think the final step is to get feedback to close the loop. Because what is the purpose of producing anything is to share it with others and to see whether it resonates, whether it has impact, and to move the discussion forward. And so this idea of getting feedback is absolutely vital, I think. And this is why our students also submit their work. They don't just submit the work to get a mark. They should also be submitting it to get feedback so they can improve. So to give you a quick case study on this, it's great that we're all on Zoom today, since we've been doing a lot of research in this area. So how people, what they do during online meetings. In particular, lots of you will probably be multitasking, doing other things while listening to me, and that's fine. We totally understand that. There's another thing that happens on these things, and that's I'm doing it right now. I'm looking at myself, and that's weird. It's almost like we're walking around with a mirror in our hand. And so I wanted to write a public engagement article about this. And so I had an idea for how this should be structured, and I recorded this raw transcript. And the raw transcript said this: we've done some research on this topic. If you've got a panel of faces, your face is there, you'll be spending 90% of the time watching yourself, and we know this for a fact. Now, here's the catch. I was telling a big fish. We have done research in this space, but this idea of 90% was entirely made up. This is the kind of thing that I would have just said in the moment while brainstorming, if you like. It was not something that I would put myself to with the written word that I was going to publish. It was interesting, of course, when I went to step two, this kind of ChatGPT refinement, it just made this sound even stronger. So it kept this 90% claim, one that I didn't actually believe in, but it made it even stronger. Research confirms it. If your face is a grid of faces, yours included, you'll be spending 90% of the time focused on yourself. And it was only by inserting myself as the author, this idea of preserving my authorial intent, was I able to pull it back and say what I actually wanted to say. Our research, with the citation, shows that most people leave their self-view on during meetings to monitor their appearance. Now, you might be thinking, come on, this is just splitting hairs. But this kind of precision matters, right? It matters to me as a scholar, and I want to make sure that I'm putting an accurate representation of our research out there, particularly into the media. So it's so important that we retain our authorship through this dance using this tool. So I come back to, again to this statement. I think this is just an advanced word processor, and it's how it's being used that matters so much. And I think that's the bit that requires really careful consideration. So one last time, if you're still not convinced by this idea of, well, they're just going to use it to cheat, like that's nice. You've said that they should be retaining authorship, but this technology affords the opportunity to cheat. You can just ask it to write an essay on your behalf, and that's a problem. Okay, that's that. Okay, so let's again take that seriously. What can we do about this? I think we have got a great response for this in our existing structures. So if you think about universities like UCL, the highest degree we can give out is a PhD. And in order to get a PhD, you don't just get that by submitting a written document, your dissertation. That's only partially what's involved. The real test or the real exam is during the viva. That's where you have a conversation with your examiners who have been selected as your peers, who know about the topic that you've done research in, and they have a conversation with you. Can you explain what you did? And the purpose here is not to catch the candidate out, it's to go beyond the written document because that written document is just one version of events and it is limited. by definition of the format that it takes. It's during these conversations that the examiners can ask questions of the candidate about things which weren't written that might be to them quite important to learn more about their journey and development of their skills and whether they deserve the degree they're working so hard to achieve. I'm really delighted that we've just exploring this idea. We just had published this morning, today, a little piece in the Times Higher Education, putting forward this argument that we look again at vivas. They still exist in our academic manual as a way of examining, particularly for undergraduates and master students, where we believe there might be academic misconduct going on. But I think there's ways in which these things could be used more intelligently. And the idea we put forward here is to use them in terms of our usual moderation process. So at UCL, whenever an assessment is marked, 10% of it is looked at by another examiner as moderation. It doesn't seem unreasonable to me to think about expanding that idea to then say, well, those 10%, instead of just looking at their written word, actually get them in and ask them about the work they did. And you move beyond simply looking at our students' ability to put text together, but instead, what do they understand? And those conversations can go beyond the written word and really get to grips with what they know and what they don't know and where their understanding is at. Critically, that could then be used to moderate and the grades that have been given. Does the grade reflect that candidate's actual level of performance or understanding? I think how this is actually, whether this would work, that's a separate issue. And I think piloting is needed. But we put this out there as a potential idea. But yeah, to come back to this slide I showed at the beginning, what are we doing here at universities? Our fundamental mission is to educate our students to get them ready for the future. So this idea that we need to prepare students for success in their future careers. And we do also have this responsibility to provide degrees that are credentials that have unquestioned academic integrity. So we know that the candidate can hold this up to say, this is what I've earned. But I think more critically, we need to make sure that we're also teaching and assessing students in ways that are preparing them for their future. And I showed that Economist article at the beginning. One of the closing lines in that basically argued that a very large proportion, something like 60%, be careful, I'm not very good with remembering these percentages. I might have big fish this. 60% of careers that exist now did not exist in the 1950s. So one thing is for sure, that technology is always going to keep moving forward. We're always going to invent new tools, and that will change the landscape. I think we've got to be very careful when we see changes like this come along, that we don't get too sentimental about mourning the kind of loss of the way that we were taught. The reality is the world moves on and the way of doing things moves on. And so I think we need to continue to reflect and evaluate what we're doing with a focus on trying to pinpoint the important skills that we want to preserve and retain while attempting to be aware of the things that actually are not that important. So the ability to hold a pen well is actually just not that important these days, given that we do most of our writing with a keyboard. And I think that's only going to change as we continue to move forward in time. With that, though, thank you very much. I look forward to hearing the questions and how this talk has been received. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Duncan, for a very engaging and entertaining presentation. I forgot in my introduction, because I was so excited to hear what you had to say, that we have a Q&A now, and it's going to be run through Slido. And I think you've been sent a link. If you haven't got that link, you need to go to Slido, which is spelled sli.do, and then #revolution is the event code. So I'm going to go over now to see if any of you have come up with questions to ask Duncan, and indeed there are several that have already come up here. So I'm going to start with the first question, Duncan, which is, Do you think that universities should introduce ethics in AI as a mandatory topic for all students?
So yeah, I mean this. Uh, so there's a focus here on ethics. I would take a step back and say I think the reason why I'm here doing this today is that I think this is a transformative technology, and it's forcing us to ask some difficult questions. And it's pretty clear to me, talking to colleagues, is that there is this question of what is taught where and by whom. And I think the answer to that is unclear. So if you just take a step back to, let's say, I focused on the computing revolution. So that's the one I grew up with. Like when I first went to school, personal computers had only just been invented. And going to college, there were PCs more readily available. But even then, and even now to this day, you don't do classes on how to use Excel or how to use Word. It's just something that's considered like a digital native skill in the same way that you're not taught how to use Google. And I think that's the place we're at here. So I hear people talking about prompt engineering, or how to use generative AI to write good prompts. I think this is something that probably looks more like learning to use Excel. I worry that we are just going to have to figure it out for ourselves. Now, I'm dodging the question a little bit because, of course, the person asked about ethics. I think there we do have courses, and if you're a PhD student at UCL, you definitely have to be do courses on academic integrity, so authorship. They had the dilemma game, didn't they? They ran out a few years ago, and there are norms and standards that need to be absorbed. I do wonder whether this is something that operates at a program level. I mean, I've just been choosing to do this in my own teaching, like talking about this because of the nature of where we're at. We run a master's program in human computer interaction. So this is the coalface of these topics. So it makes sense that we're talking about it. But yeah, that means that we're in a quite a privileged position because we talk to both the industry leaders and the researchers who are exploring these topics. But yeah, the concern is that there might be some other fields around the university with students that will be using these tools but are not getting adequate training or this kind of dialogue or reflection on it. So how that develops, I think it's uncertain to me whether it exists in its own silo, so to speak, like so it sits within the field of human computer interaction or human AI interaction, or whether it's something that does need to be kind of mandated as a generic thing for us to consider. And when it's framed around ethics, there could be some potential for that. I mean, it could be an add-on to how we think about. But the issue is, though, that we're still having these debates right now. So it's not clear that we've got clear-cut answers. I've put forward a set of positions here, and I know for a fact that not everyone's going to agree with what I have to say.
So I take that to be yes, but it depends because the world is changing so rapidly.
Sure.
Okay, a question that is more related to what you were talking about in your lecture, which is you mentioned how it's possible to, the students will, mark an essay to be kind of average or just pass. And we can all detect now whether an essay has been written by generative AI. Isn't it, won't it just be a matter of time before generative AI can write better essays than we as human beings can? And what do you think we should do about that?
I just don't think so. I mean, I'm call me skeptical. I, I just don't see this technology getting to the point where it is having conversations with itself and other synthetic peers in the way that we do. Because that's how we produce novel ideas, isn't it? We talk to each other and we sit at the forefront. An institution like UCL sits at the forefront of knowledge. And it it does a mixture of learning the conventional wisdom, but then pushing the boundaries of that. And I think we do that through our structures and processes that we've set up in the academy to, and I, you know, how that would be recreated, you know, and a synthetic world of ChatGPT agents producing their own a synthetic UCL where they kind of have knowledge that kind of is the standard and then kind of outliers that kind of push the envelope. I just don't see it. And critically, I mean, as to put it another way, I've been clear that, you know, UCL has this kind of free category approach where it says generative AI cannot be used or it's integral. So that's like the unseen written exam, or that's that I've shown you a synthetic essay and you're going to mark it. But the middle categories are going to catch all. You can use it, but acknowledge it. And I put my students there and said, yeah, you can use this. And I look, I'll just be honest, I've not seen a step change in the average performance or the quality of the work that they're producing. Um, Students are still producing student level work from my perspective as a marker. And I think it goes back to that Dunning-Kruger effect I was talking about because they're still students and they're still learning this stuff. They're not able to write adequate prompts. They're not able to interpret the answer that it's giving it. It's the blind leading the blind. Um, and without taking an active view in that learning process, you don't get better and you're not able to. And that's the thing that is the catch with this technology, right? It's a if anyone who's spent any time using these tools like generative AI, it is a conversational partner. And like all conversational partners, can talk here to you now, but I can also talk to a young child as well at a very different level. And you see that happening with these tools that they adapt to you and pitch. And so it is a conversational partner that's adapting to your level. So I just don't see this as a legitimate concern, honestly. And critically, I just from interacting with students my entire career, I just don't see this. I think most people want to get better because they know yeah, you can always take a shortcut, but one day you will find yourself in a Viva. We call it a job interview. And then it's going to be self-defeating, that short-termism. Yes, you've earned the credential by bypassing it through some form of basically contract cheating, but something tells me that's not going to work out very well for you in the long run. But
Maybe we still have the upper hand on writing original essays, but what about other forms like poems or code or that wedding speech, where they are very good at it? Is it possible in other outputs, as it were, rather than just the essay, that it might be better than us?
yeah, so I guess this comes down to the automation thing, is that this technology does seem to be good at doing a whole bunch of routine, and that's why I showed that Economist article again, because I think it is, it's these goes back to that the Victorian image of the wreckers. We're not out in the fields collecting wheat anymore, right? I live on a farm and we've got machines doing that and people drive them. The tools change. So I think all this is doing is holding up a critical reflection. At the moment, we've said we really prize and value these skills in the same way that, on this farm here, somebody would have prized the way that they use that thing that they use to cut the wheat. Um, and they'd have been very proud of that. But when, a mechanical device comes along, they'd have been threatened by that and say, this machine can't replace me in my ingeniousness. But it did, and it will. And that's just a matter of time. Time will move things forward and things will change. And I don't think that is something to necessarily be afraid of, although it does trigger fear. And that's why I think, going back to the over the holidays, I was quite inspired by some of the stuff from Dickens. And I think that's where a lot of that writing is still resonates with us because it does capture quite a lot of anxiety for how things are changing and clinging to the notions of how things used to be and potentially that was better. It was just different. And I think that's what's going to happen is that skills that we consider to be the apex of our human intelligence or achievement are just simply going to be reassessed and put back into a different slot, as some of those things can be automated. But there'll be things that we still preserve that the machines can't do.
Okay, there's loads of questions coming through, so I'm going to ask some more now. One here is uh, you address the issues of AI in higher education. Shouldn't we be starting to address these issues at schools as well? And if so, how?
Hmm.
the same, or
Yeah, I think it's a little bit different though, isn't it? I mean, I because the nature of the work, isn't it? Schools still, for better or worse, that is in some ways my, this kind of training wheels argument. Despite, I mean, it is curious when you think about it. That we all, the argument I've been making throughout here is that we've got better tools and it's changing the way we do stuff. But despite that, you go to any primary school in the country and they're still focusing on holding the pencil correctly, recursive handwriting and spelling. So there has been a decision at a societal level, government policy, to say that we need to protect this, despite the fact that none of us, well, very few of us, use pen to do our writing in our jobs. But it's been determined, a decision, a value judgment has been made that this is something that we need to retain. And I think that's true of a lot of the basic skills that are taught much lower down. And I think, the reason why we're focusing on universities is because that's where these tools are kind of really showing up the most, because it's writing essays and doing that kind of more knowledge, higher order knowledge work. They're able to write these kind of essays. But yeah, I think lower down the school, there's a lot more focus on rote learning.
okay. One that's got lots of likes is to do with the topic of cheating, which is, do AI adoption concerns stem from high productivity demands? For example, we're being
Mm.
pressurized to publish, publish, publish. And does this push people to cheat or
Mhm.
just keep up to stay relevant? So,
Yes, yes. I've given versions of this. I gave a talk version of this talk in Eindhoven last month, and I opted to take this out. But yeah, it's good. I thank you for this question because it's something that I do feel quite passionately about, and I wondered whether to keep it in. I think this is actually at the heart of it. I think this is actually one of the core things is that um, the world is competitive, and many of us see things as a competitive race. It's like we're racing as fast as we can to beat everyone else. And I think that goes back to this idea of universities being credentialing systems. So we're earning degrees in order to get our qualifications to get our jobs, or in academia, we're getting papers in order to, earn badges to move ourselves forward. And there's a focus, I think, on these tokens that kind of quantify our success. And I've been thinking a lot about this in terms of I enjoy running. And you think about running a 5K race, and there's two versions of this. One is if you're an Olympic athlete and you're focusing on going as fast as you can, being the best in the world. And competition brings out the best in us sometimes. I'm not saying that we don't want to have a competitive environment, but competition does weird things. Um, but I think in that framing, these large language models, ChatGPT and this like, can be seen as a bit like a performance enhancing drug. It's conferring an unfair advantage. The alternative is to view these things as, I enjoy park run, and that's the opposite of training for the Olympics. Everyone's running the same race, but they're running their own race. Yes, there are one or two that care about becoming first, but whatever. Leave them to do their own thing. In fact, I did one of these last weekend, and I was one of the last because I was just enjoying. It was such a beautiful morning in a park. I was having all my thoughts run around my head, preparing for this talk. Took some photographs, and that was great. I had a wonderful race, and I was less concerned about the competition. So yeah, I do think that it really is quite toxic that what we've created here with the very competitive world and this feeling that and it's simple that it feels that we are in decline in the sense of we need to work harder and harder and harder to achieve just the basics of getting a job and having a home. And I think that is kind of messing with people. And I certainly see that, in the classroom where students are, despite being at a top tier institution like UCL, are very anxious. Is this enough? Is my degree enough to get me a job? Will it get me the job that I need? I mean, the world has always been competitive, but it does seem there's a kind of we could probably have a much longer debate about why that is, and there's probably numerous explanations. But yeah, I do think that that is something that's going on here. Is that this framing of seeing things as a competition where we need to win, and this technology is just going to be marshaled as kind of kerosene to be thrown on that fire to kind of speed everything up, is a concern for sure.
I mean, I think there are AI tools that are helping students develop other tools that help them to get on in the world. For example, developing is skills when you're having an interview to know how to answer and to practice, and that's about practicing. But I'm going to go back to the questions
Mhm.
now, and this one is, to do with how do we assess effectively. So, do you think we should be shifting to an assessment approach that places importance on the process, um, showing your workings out, whether it's with an AI tool or without?
Yeah, so it's that combination, isn't it? Your ability to produce a final artifact that is good, good quality. I mean, I mean, ultimately, again, it goes back to preparing people for the world of work. The finished product should be good, and you should be able to show and demonstrate the process that you went through to get there, right? Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny here, Yvonne, because I gave a version of this talk yesterday, and your former student Leon asked a question pretty much along this line, where in our teaching, we do group projects. So the students work in small teams to a design brief. And part of that is the final thing they produce, but a large part of their assessment is also showing their workings. And that's a combination of a document that's produced, a portfolio, but also those weekly catch-ins with their mentors so they can kind of really develop and show their skills. Because that is how we work, isn't it? The things we're producing operate everything we produce sits within a social space, right? And so I think, yeah, how we can do that in a way that's scalable is an important question to ask. And I think that's what comes back to why we focus so much on essays and these exam scripts. It's because it's easy, right? We can get someone in a room and say, give us a 500 word or 1,500 word essay. But I think thinking about how to do these more, these kind of other forms of assessment, they do require a bit more thought and time. And also, there's a big cultural thing that has to happen as well to make sure people feel safe and valued and respected, and it's done fairly as well, because we know that there can also be challenges as well in those kind of settings.
Okay, we've got 2, 3 minutes to go, so I'm going to ask a couple more questions. Oh, it's jumped up. Um, which is oh, it's gone now. Are there any good ways of detecting if AI has been used in an essay? This is again going back to this idea that we need to somehow see how it's been used. And could we just ask the students to say which parts of their essays and how much they've used ChatGPT? Or should we be developing these, automated tools that will do it on our behalf?
Yeah, I just think this is a non-starter because I think the way that these things work, the moment you give it any of your text, it will change all the words. So, like I think this is an outmoded way of thinking of plagiarism detection, and this is why I kind of put forward this Times Higher Education article that we had published today, leaning on the idea of bringing a subset of students in for a viva to have a conversation, because yes, the moment they use this tool in any shape or form, it's going to you don't you lose that kind of wordsmithing, and I think actually that's not a bad thing. It's your point of view, right? So some people feel very precious about the wordsmithing and they feel that their words are their words. um I'm taking, and my argument is take a step back and to say, what do you intend to say, and then let the AI kind of say that on your behalf in a way, and to not get too precious about the individual choice of words that are being used. But I've been using this pipeline quite a lot to produce quite a lot of content. By the end of it, there's quite a few phrases that were never mine, so to speak, but the arguments in the piece are mine, and I would be able to stand there and have a conversation with anyone who asked me about it. It's just that these precise word phrases wouldn't be mine. I just don't think that's important. That's kind of my bigger claim, if you like, that was running through the talk. So
Okay.
that's a more stronger reply, I think.
That's right. One of the tools that excited a lot of people came out 2 months ago, Notebook LM, and it was shown how you can just put in lots of PDFs of people's papers or even their books, and it will generate a podcast, as like we're having two people having a chat about a topic. And it was very impressive. I wondered what you thought about this tool and whether that you'll be, there'll be more of these types of more creative tools other than asking ChatGPT to do something for you.
Sure, exactly. And I think that's what we're in the business of in the field of human computer interaction is I think we've had we've had writing, written documents for a long time throughout history. There's a reason we've adapted, since the early books. But it's a format that was afforded given the technologies that we had available at the time. And we've got new tools and we can, synthesize content in different ways. It's more easier. Yeah, to put it bluntly, the way that we communicate best is to go for a walk with somebody. So it's no wonder to me that that would be an engaging way to, a more engaging way to think about content. It's like, go for a walk, put your headphones on, and listen to somebody explaining complex ideas. That feels far more appetizing to me than sitting in a corner reading a book. But that's my own personal preference. I think that's the other thing is that we're not all the same, right? We know individual differences exist. And technology does afford for different ways of learning and different ways of engaging with content. Some people like to watch telly, some people like to read books, some people like to listen to records or listen to podcasts, and I think that's all fine. I think that's what the technology affords us. We've got this rich repertoire of tools that we've invented. We're pretty smart in that way. And the key thing is to get back to the core idea, and that is at the core what this is all about. It's about that retaining. That's why I keep saying retaining our human voice and our intent. That's where the action's at. And that's
That's a
what we need to
great
not lose sight of.
That's a great way to end, and we're out of time. So I'd just like to thank Duncan and give him a round of applause, which we can't do in the webinar, but just imagine this is going 100
Thank
times.
you.
Thank you again
Thank
for a
you.
really great talk and well measured and thoughtful, and look forward to seeing what you have to say next.
Thank you so much. Thank you.